In my work as an educator, I really think about what are the human resources we need to tackle this problem. Many of us probably think in terms of technology. What solar panel costs do we need? What electric vehicle efficiency do we need? I think in terms of what human resources do we need to tackle this problem. And so I try to think about how do I create students that sort of demand evidence for their ideas? How do I create students that are creative? How do I create students that are willing to deal with ambiguity, possibly embrace failure, and really try to do new things? So that's what I'm focused on day to day. And this is really interesting because I think that Geof and Sonoma Clean Power and these agencies are actually customers for these students that we're creating. And so I'm really interested in their perspective and your perspective on not only what technologies do we need, but what sort of mindsets do we need, what sort of people do we need, what sort of societal values do we need in order to really create this new transition to a new way of getting the things we like, to steal from Amory Lovins, the sort of cold beer and warm showers that we all want, but in a way that is going to protect human health and wealth for the foreseeable future. That's pretty much my framing. So I'm gonna turn it over to Geof now for a little bit to talk about some of his efforts and how their thinking at Sonoma Clean Power has sort of moved into the transportation sector and why. And then we're gonna begin a dialogue that will actually include the audience as well, so that we can get your perspective and thoughts on new ways of reimagining our energy economy and what it actually provides for its citizens.
Great, well thank you. And this is always such a fun crowd. I love coming back here. So not too long ago I was involved in designing the master plan for Sonoma Mountain Village, and so it's gratifying to be back here and actually hearing about development plans here, so that's exciting. Sonoma Clean Power has really been evolving, as Daniel said. We launched with a mission to have cleaner electricity and cleaner sources of power, and that's still really at the core of what we do. But we hit a point where last year when Senate Bill 350 was being debated, the governor had an item in that bill that would have required California to cut petroleum use by 50% from 1990 levels by 2030. And that got struck out of the bill as a deal to the oil industry. And we got a lot of other good things passed, but that one did not pass. And at that point, a friend of mine, Rusty Klassen, came up to me and he said, our man Jerry needs some help. He needs an example that his guy, that Sonoma County or someplace can actually achieve the goal that he set out. And so we went and talked to the Transportation Authority. I see Lauren here today. And we talked to other public agencies, the Water Agency, we talked to the grid operators, Lawrence Berkeley Labs. We got the governor's office involved, and we formed a coalition that really set that out as an objective. And the reason why we did that is that we started working backward, as Daniel was saying, from the real goal. The real goal isn't necessarily cleaner electricity. That's a stepping stone. That's a tool that we use. The real goal that we realized is solving climate change at affordable prices and supporting our local economy while we do it, period. So the way I'd say it is affordable zero carbon energy for all human purposes. That's the goal, right? So every agency and every company and every person has that as one of their mission statements somewhere along the line. And so we realized that we had gotten to a point with the portfolio of sources for Sonoma Clean Power, our default mix is 80% carbon free, and that's fantastic. That it's half the emissions of PG&E, and PG&E is already pretty good. From a national standard, PG&E is doing pretty well. So we'd already gotten halfway to zero from PG&E when we really stopped and thought about it and said, what's the potential? What more could we do to improve our ability to address climate change? If we just shifted 5% of Sonoma County drivers from gasoline to electric cars, it would change more and it would produce more climate savings than eliminating all the fossil energy out of our remaining electricity. And we looked at that and we said, holy shit, we got our eye on the wrong ball. Because we can do something about electric cars. We can't do it alone. We need the transportation authority. We need the car makers. We need the dealers. We need citizens working together with us. But we can be part of it, right? We can offer better rates. We can do advertising. We can do chastising of people who are trying to hide the beauty of electric cars from us. How many of you have electric cars? This is a really unusual audience. This is awesome. There's like 18 hands in the air, right? How many of you have test driven an electric car but don't have one yet? That's about the same number. How many of you who just raised your hands in the second round want one? That was all of them. That was all. I think that was all of them. So one of the things we found is that test driving a car is one of the best ways to get people to want one, because they're wicked fast. They're super fun to drive, and most people have no idea about this, but when you stomp on it, see, I'm a nerd, I'm a physics guy, an electric motor has maximum torque from a dead stop. Anybody who's ever done racing knows a gasoline engine, you got to get up to 5,000 RPM before you have maximum torque. So that's really fun to drive. My Nissan Leaf can beat a BMW to 30 miles an hour. And then I fall behind. Not the 9.3, but a more pedestrian BMW, perhaps. So anyway, so what we started realizing is we had our eye on the wrong ball. Why? We had our eye on the wrong ball because we were talking about what's called a proximate goal. Proximate goals are things that are really tools. They're not goals. And they're things that are super, super important, like solar energy, or like wind power, or biomass, or energy efficiency. Those are proximate goals. They're not ultimate goals. Why do you want solar power? There's another reason that's one layer deeper. You want it because it supports our local industry. There's people whose jobs are in that. They work locally. You want to support them. So that's an economic reason and a jobs reason. You want it because it cuts emissions. You want it because it's silent, it doesn't pollute. There's so many different reasons why you want solar power, but it's not the thing itself. Go one layer deeper. What's the ultimate goal? So we found out we have three. Our ultimate goals are reducing emissions, supporting the local economy, and making sure that we do it in affordable ways and extending the benefits of what Daniel was introducing of a clean energy economy to more people. We have over 20% of Sonoma County's population gets a subsidy on electricity because they're low enough income. They qualify for that. Those people today are not driving electric cars, even in the proportion to the average population, let alone the people in this room. And they need access to them. And they're not going to get that access until we figure out how to lease vehicles and how to sell vehicles and how to move more used vehicles into that market space and get charging at multifamily locations. Super, super difficult to figure out, especially when there's a landlord involved. So we started to really take this on because we realized, okay, here's the really big potential, is getting people not just into electric cars, but the whole suite of things around that. So that's one tool that's available to us today because every automaker has an electric car. Many of them have at least 3 in pre-production. And all of them have solved the range problem. So for those of you who aren't getting an electric car because of range, first of all, it's a bogus story you're telling yourself. The ranges already work, even with 80 to 90 mile ranges. But all the automakers now have cars that will be available by 2018 that are over 120 mile ranges. Many of them 150 to 200 mile ranges now. So that problem's done. But really we had to start thinking about the big objective in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, doing it in a way that could be launched with perhaps a government subsidy and a grant, but sustainable over time on its own income stream, and something that we could then export to the state of California. So the kinds of threads that we're working with, and this program isn't done yet. In fact, we're still in the design phase, and we want ideas, right? So this is a platform today where we would love your ideas of how to make this work. We know we need more locations where charging infrastructure is available. That's clear. We know that we need to solve problems where when everybody comes home from work with their electric car and they plug in at 5 to 7 p.m., we already have a super peak problem caused by the residential sector at that time of day. And because solar has already solved the peak problem for the commercial sector, because solar energy contracts that are signed today and current projects today are already poised to deliver more energy than the state needs as a whole by 2024 for all purposes. In the middle of the day, only. So at noon in the spring, by 2024, solar power alone will deliver 108% of all the energy we need for all purposes in California. That's amazing, and it's an incredible success story. Where are we going to put it all? Turns out having too much energy on the grid is worse than having not enough, because when you have too much, you can't black it out. You have to blow it out. You have to find somewhere to dump it as heat. And that's actually a bigger problem because transformers get fatigued and other things happen. So we have to design that future. And so the real paradigm shift we discovered when we were asking the basic question, climate, affordability, local economy, those are the basic questions. The real thing we discovered is matching sources of electricity to what people want, the demand for electricity, is what we've been doing for the last century. Now we flip it around. We have to match demand to the available sources. Renewable energy isn't like fossil energy. Storage, everybody's been talking about storage and batteries. That is not a panacea. It's a very small slice of the solution because batteries are good for solving really short-term problems. But you want to get through a 2-week winter storm, batteries don't do you any good at all. So what do we have to do? We have to match loads to supply. And the future of a 100% renewable grid, this is working backwards, isn't the same. We're not dispatching power plants anymore. The available supply is now a statistical phenomenon based on weather patterns. The weather report matters a lot. And now we have to figure out what loads can we manage. Well, turns out there's huge loads. In fact, the vast majority of electric uses and energy uses in general can be timed to match when renewables are available. Pumping water turns out to be something you can time because the water pressure in your house is not due to pumping in most places. It's due to gravity. But you got to get the water into a surge tank or a tank at the top of a hill. That timing can be timed. You can actually let that water level go up and down, and the gravity fed from that tank can supply the water pressure to your home. Water pumping, refrigeration in the wine industry, that's something we've got a lot of here. You can refrigerate at certain times a day, you can let it coast other times a day, you can interrupt that. Car charging turns out to be the biggest potential controllable use. And when your car charges shouldn't matter so long as when you go to pick it up, there's plenty of charge for the trip you're about to take. And so we've been designing a system and we're about to start rolling it out. So later this year in the fall, we'll start making charge units available that have a grid signal receiver on it. We want to come in, and if you already have an electric car, we want to swap out the charger you have now for this new type at no cost to you. And we want to be able to interrupt your charging for up to 2 hours a day. And in exchange, we want to talk about the benefit that we're creating on the grid and supporting new construction of renewable energy to support that. So that kind of idea, that program isn't yet fully designed. So that's a concept. We need to finish that out. We also are batting around ideas like, let's put electric cars at an employer that has significant low-income drivers who work for them. Let's let them rent those cars at a cost that actually encourages people to try them, maybe 1 month at a time, no long-term commitment. Let's let them charge at work so they don't even need charging at home. Let's let that get out into the community. It's a new kind of car sharing. It's relatively inexpensive, and it could hugely expand the potential marketplace for this incredibly low carbon resource. So the way Dale Roberts at the Water Agency put it, he said, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from one poser driving a Prius, and that was me, actually it still is, I have a Prius, is the same as 23 Secret Service agents driving Teslas on Evergreen. And I'll explain that. Evergreen is 100% renewable energy, and today, I don't know if you can read this, it says, my EV runs on magma. Evergreen. Evergreen's 100% renewable energy made inside Sonoma County, and it's available for a small premium. The sticker, so magma means geothermal energy because hot rocks in the earth take water from your toilet, turn it into steam, and spin turbines and runs your electric car if you're on Evergreen. And by the end of this year, the sticker will say, my EV runs on starlight and magma. because we're going to be 50-50 solar and geothermal. And so the idea is 23 electric cars running on this resource mix, even with the fact that you have small amounts of methane leaking out of the ground naturally when you do geothermal, is the same as one Prius. It's this massive reduction in emissions. And so what we're working to do is figure out how to extend that to the biggest population possible and find ways to do it that require no subsidy over time. So it might be that the first few years of this program, we got to put in some public money, we got to get some grants going. That's the way usually these things work, because a private business isn't going to try this on their own. But we want to find the model that private businesses will pick up over time, or that the public agency can do that doesn't require that continued subsidy. So I want to turn it back to Daniel, but I also want to dive in and invite you that while we're moving into this next phase of talking, that you start to think about ways to challenge us back or to offer ideas of what we could be doing along those lines. And if you haven't test driven an electric vehicle, try it. They're really, really fun.
So for me, that last example is a really great thought exercise, right? We have this thing, if you consider the Prius, which was sort of the marker of environmental consciousness, if that was the goal, you would have missed the ball on seeing this sort of EV actually as an opportunity, right? So I guess, one thing I'm interested in is, how do we change our thinking so that we can identify that next opportunity, right? So that we question the Prius we're currently driving and look for that next sort of EV opportunity. I don't have a good answer for that, but I really like to pose the question, and I think it's this sort of working backwards and thinking about the goal you want to get to. And the thing I like to think about is also just the benefits. So one question I want to pose is, imagine how many things would be different in this sort of zero carbon energy world. Personally, I can't wait to not hear car noise. When the internal combustion engine goes away, how quiet is your neighborhood going to be? What is going to be the incidence of asthma along the 101 corridor and the I-80 corridor, right? What are these other enormous benefits that we'll reap from changing these things?
So I see Councilmember Gary Weis, and Director from Sonoma Clean Power in the back. I want to call you out as being the person who should chastise us for not bringing up bicycles. And so I want to own something.
Electric bike. Actually, what I was going to say is I'd love quiet cars too, but you got to be careful about the safety aspect.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. But what I want to say is, while we're sitting here touting the benefits of electric cars, let's not let ourselves get into the trap we just talked about. Electric cars aren't the answer either, right? It's a tool toward a goal. So what we have to keep doing, and Daniel and I were talking about this term that we call dipping. Stay up here. Think about the really, really important topics, but you can't get everything done when you're way up here. Dive down, try something. We're trying electric cars, and we're going to try it deep because we're pretty sure that makes a lot of sense right now. But let's come back up and look around and say, is the hydrogen economy actually emerging? Is that a better solution? We don't know yet. It doesn't look like it today, but it might be. Is a culture where we as an agency are supporting development near transit something that we can be materially beneficial on? Can we help with safe routes to schools for bicycling and walking and all of that? So that's up here. And so I just want to call that out and admit that electric cars aren't the answer either. They're just a better tool than we had in the past. And so I just want to share that.
The last time I think I heard Geof speak, he said something that really stuck with me and that I stole. I should tell you, I stole it from my class. Nothing is good, nothing is bad, right? So solar panels are currently in some areas of China releasing toxic chemicals into rivers, right? Wind turbines are, we have problems with apex predators, being killed by winter. So even the things that we think of as really good things are actually still bad. Single occupancy vehicles increase social isolation. They might be bad for the fabric of our society. And so again, the more opportunities we have to actually walk around are probably better. So I like that focus on what are the goals. And if your goals are healthy communities and all of these things, but it's complex. I think I saw somebody in the audience really interested.
Why don't you jump in?
Jump in.
Well, kind of along that thread, what do you anticipate being the most painful part to the transition to electric transportation? What's going to be bad or hard that we should start thinking about really?
Okay, so I got to ride in a Google car recently that was driving itself, and that was a disturbing experience because it was so law-abiding. And I will share, and I was just at a high school that's building an electric car, a switch vehicle, as part of our program yesterday. And one of the challenges I threw down for the high school students that are in auto shop was, you guys are the age that are gonna have to figure out how robots can drive together with humans on the same roadways. That freaks me out. But I'll tell you, the robots drive better. They're way better drivers. So that worries me. But also just, I think the cultural aspect of getting rid of the idea as a car as an owned object and moving to a mobility, transportation as a service, that's something that's hard for people my age and up to deal with. But I'll tell you, in high school, they were like, yeah, bring it on. We don't need to own a car. And I was like, when I was in high school, I had to own a car. That was my number one objective in life. They don't care. So there's a good facet to the recycling program called death, you know.
A quick comment for me. There's not enough NPR in the world to make all commutes like pleasant. So a robot chauffeur and Wi-Fi, sign me up for that future. Let's see, yes.
So I just wanted to go a little farther with individual forms of transportation. Because Sonoma County, I live in Berkeley. I don't live in Sonoma County. So I've been using public transportation almost exclusively for 35 years. And here you have a county that was rural, that's become suburban. And I think one of the real issues in terms is getting people to use zero carbon collective transport, not so much emphasis on the individual vehicle, the individual electric car. And I'm curious, what you're thinking about, how to change people's culture, because there's a perception that collective transportation, public transportation is too slow. I know that's true here. It's not so true where I live.
Yeah.
It's actually better in many ways.
You're asking a hard question, and so whenever we get hard questions, we go to 8th graders. It turns out that's a really good age to ask. So we convene 300 8th graders from time to time. They're coming out of schools and they're going into high school. And it's in a transitional time of their lives, and we ask them this question. And one of the best answers, I love it because they don't even hesitate. They just blurt out an answer. And one of the best answers I heard was, the way I framed it was, how do we triple the amount of bus ridership in 1 year? And the best answer I heard was, make the buses look like trolleys, everyone likes trolleys. Right. And I thought, that's so silly, it's right. and so that kind of question is exactly the right question to ask. And I honestly think at this point, finding better and better and better questions and refining the questions is as valuable as answering them. Because one of the things that was just a delight in my life is when I was working on this project and we came up with things that were preventing us from doing it the right way. They were laws, they were financing structures, there were all kinds of things that were getting in the way. Like, at the time, you couldn't gather rainwater from the roof of your home and bring it inside to flush your toilet. Thank Jared Huffman for solving that one. But we published it. And Arnie Soll, who was formerly Deputy Secretary of State, he said, make sure it's either 3 problems or 10. It has to be either 3 or 10. And then publish it. And we published the 10 reasons why sustainability is illegal. And it was a 1-page document. And it got picked up and stolen and reprinted in textbooks all over the planet. And the cool part about that is people started working on the problems. And it became this viral tool for solving the problem, just to define the question well. So that excites me. When you can actually define a question that concretely and say, that's a problem, here's another one that got solved. We said you can't put up one solar array and share it among 4 neighbors in your same neighborhood. That's stupid because you have to duplicate all of the switches and all the parts of the system. Well, that actually, it didn't totally get solved. Community solar isn't really quite here yet, but parts of it did. Virtual net metering became available and bill credit transfer and all these other tools. So just defining the problem, I think, is one of the tools. Yeah.
Let's see.
Can
Gentlemen.
I take you back to the two-way charging? Elaborate some more. Are you saying that a fleet, the large fleet of electric vehicles can become our mobile battery system that will neutralize the intermittency problem of solar?
So there are several things that are going on, and I'll just talk loud. You can keep it up there.
No.
No? All right. All right. So electric cars alone are not the answer. They're not enough. But it's a huge potential. So the amount of energy that one electric car uses with an average daily commute is similar to an average single-family household. It's significant. So around $50 a month or so for a small single-family household that's a recently constructed energy-efficient household is similar to what an electric car uses. And so that's a significant amount of energy. And if you can time when that's being used, then yes, that can solve the diurnal problem of most of the solar issue that we have today, which is overgeneration starting around 10 a.m. in cool spring seasons, and then not nearly enough renewable generation in the evening hours, because wind doesn't start in California till the evening. It does not solve in any way the seasonal problem. The seasonal problem is a 2-week, dark, not too windy winter storm that happens frequently. We don't have an answer for that yet. Biomass is going to be important. Geothermal is going to be important. Changing the way we think about blackouts is going to be important. Right now, today, the system is designed for 8 hours a year of average blackout. 8 hours a year is 0.1% blackout. If you double that, you can halve the cost of the system. What if we just doubled that and said, we're going to allow 16 hours of blackout every year? We don't need to keep upgrading the system nearly as frequently. So as an engineer, I like to know that data. And that doubling the blackouts, having the incremental cost, that's a really rough back of the envelope number. We need a better number than that. We need people working on that problem to solve that. So it's part of the answer, but it's not the whole thing. We need to find ways to store energy, which is why I haven't completely written off hydrogen. If you make hydrogen from renewable sources of electricity, it's a worthy research project. Today, it is super expensive, super unreliable, and not very well working. But we need to store energy somehow, and renewable energy.
I supervised a grad student who wrote a paper on that, but for tiny grids in West and East Africa. Maybe not totally applicable. Let's see, more questions. I think you've had your hand up for a little while.
Can you, this is for Geof, can you tie the credit generating power of a public bank with the energy generating power of Sonoma Clean Power?
Yes.
How?
So we're positioning Sonoma Clean Power to have strong financial reserves and to build toward a credit rating because we ultimately want to bond capacity. We want to be able to bond for $1 billion because that's the kind of scale it takes to really solve a county-wide infrastructure problem. And so the way that working with financial institutions becomes valuable is they can help us along the way. And by that, I mean when we get access to collateral to do things like borrow money or buy really favorable power contracts, it can reduce the cost of energy for everyone. If we're borrowing money at 3 or 4 or 5% interest, but it's saving 15% off the whole county's bills, it's a win. So we don't need to have the return flow to our agency as long as the customers get it. So there are literally 7 bills in the state legislature at the moment dealing with preferential treatment for methane, which is fantastic for you guys. In the meantime, until those bills pass, or one or two of them, we have what's called a feed-in tariff, which is the worst named. We actually call it profit for professional feed-in tariff, that will pay you to produce energy. I know it's a bad pun. That will pay you to produce energy that we can then turn around and deliver to our customers through the Evergreen tariff, locally produced in Sonoma County renewable energy. And we actually pay a hefty premium above what the market generally offers. And we have a whole series of bonuses for things like local labor to build it, the size of the project. If you're under 250 kW, you get another bonus, et cetera, et cetera. So we can talk. It's on our website. And we can tell you more about it.
Yeah, yes. In these discussions, we tend to circle around from technology to policy to economics to policy. When does it land on the individual? And I guess the other thing we talk about is how to fix it in sub-Saharan Africa or India. We keep reaching out for somebody to fix this. How do we get personal accountability regarding our energy use?
So I have 100 ideas, but I'll limit it to 2. One is get an electric car and sign up for Evergreen. You get one of these stickers, which will make your neighbors curious about what the hell it means. And that's the point. The other is we have a beta test of an app that's coming out in a couple months. So Energize is an app. And I'm really excited about it because things like this have been tried in the past, but nothing exactly like this. What it does is it allows you to respond to an alert that tells you when the grid is particularly dirty or particularly expensive. And I'm talking about the Northern California grid as a whole, not just us. And if you can reduce your energy use during those times, you can raise funds. And here's the innovative part. You can be part of a team that raised funds for your school or a charity. And now there's peer pressure. That's by design. We want you to care about how your team is doing. We want you to talk to your teammates and say, hey, we didn't raise very much on that last round. We gotta like raise some more money for the school because we need to get 25,000 for this new whatever. And that's the point. The whole point is like, let's make it fun. Let's make it not cost anything, but let's also kind of build some accountability into it. So that's a tool that'll launch early in the summer, so a couple months from now. And look for that. We'll have some announcements, and it'll go out, I think, first through the school districts, and then next year through some nonprofits as well. We want to expand it outward from there. But we do want to build it gradually so that we can keep up with the updates that are necessary. So that I'll keep it to that. Do you want to add anything? Yeah, sorry.
So,
Taking all the questions.
my view is that, so personal virtue is important, personal responsibility is important. We make our better decisions when it's easier to make the better decisions. So I really think that there's a place for policy to sort of get the rules right and get the policies right so that it's actually the right thing to do. I mean, how many people were disappointed by a non-meat sandwich today? How many of you ate vegetarian as a result and might not have otherwise? So just when certain, that's possibly a bad metaphor here, but when it's easy to make the right decision gets made, I think. And I think there's a place to look at that in our energy policies and our economic policies as well. Okay, in the back.
This is a perfect segue. My question is, what would you suggest as far as the disconnect that is going on between what we say we want and the people who are in a funding or investing position who are not funding the things that we say we want? And I bring this up because I have a client who is now 3 years into creating the first renewable energy powered electric vehicle charging station network on California's Pacific Coast Highway going from Eureka down to Malibu. He is 3 years in, stations up and running, new stations with leases and whatnot, and at a funding impasse. And all the usual suspects, who are the VCs, recently I got our offering memorandum and executive summary to the Breakthrough Coalition, the Zuckerberg Gates Coalition, saying, oh, we want to fund all these wonderful sustainable things, and zero. I'd like you to speak to that, because we need to put our money where our mouth is. And we've got this guy 3 years in who's doing the right thing to put in place the infrastructure that you are talking about that we need for EVs, and we are literally at a 3-year impasse.
So his name is Richard Sachin, and he's ahead of his time. I don't see him here today, but he's a fantastic guy. And I think that's part of it. So some of the innovators are early enough that the funders haven't caught up. And a lot of where the funding is going is into seemingly secret things at tech companies. So if you have any doubts about money, Samsung, Apple, Google, et cetera, are investing extremely heavily in this space. In fact, I did a project for Google in 2006 on managed charging from a grid signal-based vehicle system. And they wanted to own the software back then, and it's finally a public project now. But they've been at this a long time. What's not happening as quickly is the grants that are funding broad-scale types of infrastructure. There are air quality management district grants for charging. There are smaller level efforts. But this goes back to the heart of the question that Daniel proposed. One is, one way to ask a question is, what can we do to make the world better? And that's a good question. It's really different than saying, what would we have done this year to stay on track to meet what we know needs to happen? We know something needs to happen by 2020 and 2030 and 2040. What do we have to do to stay on that? That's a very different question. Well, here's a wild thing. Getting to 2030 and achieving a 50% reduction in petroleum use, you can't sell one more vehicle between now and then that has a non-hybrid or non-electric system. Not one. So do we say we're fucked? Or do we say, there's an opportunity? And the smart people are saying, there's an opportunity. Back to Amory Lovins, who quoted Sheikh Omar Yamani, I think his name was, who said the oil age didn't end, or the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age isn't going to end because we run out of oil. And we have to supplant, we have to replace, and what it means is we have to think about disruption, and that word is hugely overused, but it's still true that we have to think about something, and that answer only comes when we ask the bigger question of how do we get to where we know we have to be, rather than how do we make progress. Progress is boring. Progress isn't interesting because it doesn't challenge us. Anyway, I could go on. Sorry.
I mean, so related for me, real quick, is that scientists are telling us that we need to get a certain greenhouse gas footprint globally to reach some of our climate goals. Now, nature always gets the math right? So there's a certain number of molecules. Now, nature hasn't whispered all its secrets to us about what that number of molecules is, but nature doesn't care where that molecule came from. The whole climate is going to do what it's going to do, and that math is going to turn out right. So there's actually a lot of interesting embedded stuff. I personally like French cheese. So there's cows on somebody else's greenhouse gas inventory, and production on somebody else's greenhouse gas inventory that probably aren't showing up in our books if we're doing it on what we call a production versus a consumption basis. So transportation, right now, if we just look at the molecules emitted right here in Sonoma County, I think we're around 60%. If you look at all consumption, that shrinks down to about 20-ish% according to some research that was presented at a recent event in Sonoma County. And so then there's all of these other things about the embedded carbon in our diets, the embedded carbon in this microphone and my cell phone, all of these other places where we again have to be thinking, well, okay, what's the step beyond the Prius? What's the step beyond the electric vehicle? How do you solve these new, bigger problems and really get to this radical place that we need to get to? We've got all these charts with these beautiful straight lines going down to 2050. And then the reality line is north of that line, right? So how do we imagine that?
But we know how to do this shit. We know how to get to one planet. We know how to do it. And has anyone been to Siena, Italy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Siena's famous for being a lovely place where the average ecological footprint is under one planet, right? They know how to do this. It's easy to do when you set up the conditions right. So we know how to do this. In a technological rich society, it's a harder problem. Why? Because we have money. That's what makes the problem harder. So now we're burdened by our incredible wealth and the incredible disparity of that wealth, which is here as well. So
I think, so we got ice cream waiting for us, so maybe a question or one more question or two, one more question.
why don't you pick?
Well, if I'm gonna pick another student. Geof.
Okay, this is for Geof. Kind of back to the concept of financing. Have you ever thought about the inverse, not necessarily like borrowing money to purchase more EV vehicles, but using essentially your revenue stream to back loans and kind of guarantee them to I guess, bring long-term, low interest rate loans to EVs?
Don't buy that.
Yeah, there's an incredible tool. There's a whole bunch of financial tools out there. One of them that I'll mention, to be brief, is called the loan loss reserve. So if we put up a loan loss reserve that covers the risk premium that a bank places on lending. So a stodgy old bank that takes no risks says your risk premium is 15% of the face value of this loan. If we put up 15% for the bank and say you're covered, you cannot lose in this proposition based on your own math, then we can start leveraging our customer funds, which are owned by our customers, to do good out in the world for those customers. And that tool is incredible, especially when you pair it with state resources. So CATFA, the California Advanced Energy, Fuel, and Transportation Finance Administration, I think I got that right, the longest, unpleasantest acronym on the planet, has similar kinds of programs. So does the Infrastructure Bank, so does the Strategic Growth Council, so do a lot of these kinds of state-based resources. And if we can pair up, so we're only taking part of the loan loss, we can extend our money even further. So you're totally on the right track there. And I think with that, are we going to ice cream? Thank you guys. Yeah.